Alrighty, so we have a game. But there's one more bit of polish I want to add before we finish, and that is our current screens look pretty bare bones. We don't have any nice GUI on them. So what I want to do is I want to show a very simple technique for essentially taking something like here, I'll show you an example of our main menu texture that was created, taking something like this and turning it into an interactive GUI. So effectively what we're going to do is we're going to perform some scaling. We're going to get this texture onto the scene through the onGUI method. Then we're going to position GUI elements so that we can click on them. Now things are going to get a little bit more complex when we work with our high score screen and our win or lose screen, and we'll show you guys some techniques for dealing with Unity's built-in GUI engine in a fairly quick and dirty but effective manner. Sound good?
Sounds very good.
Alrighty, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to start off by going into my start screen and writing that all out. So let's jump into the start screen, and I'm just going to move all this code off to the side because we're going to be replacing that shortly. The first thing we need is we need the native width and the native height of the screen stored somewhere. So I'm simply going to say const or private const float width. Now the width and the height of these textures are 1920 by 1080. Now the problem is if I try to draw a main menu texture onto the start screen, it won't scale automatically. So we need a way to scale the GUI to constrain to our screen, but allow for textures that are developed at a higher resolution, or a lower resolution, depending. So what we're going to do is we're going to scale everything. So I'm going to go ahead and write a couple lines of code in onGUI. I'm going to say var width scale equals screen.width divided by width, and var height scale equals screen.height divided by height. Next up, I'm going to tell the entire GUI system to scale itself based off these two scales. So I'll say GUI.matrix equals matrix 4x4 dot TRS, or transform rotation scale, translate rotation scale, sorry, with the position of vector3 dot 0, a quaternion of quaternion dot identity, and a scale of a new vector3 of width scale and height scale. Now this will scale everything in our GUI to a particular ratio that is determined by our screen width and our target width. So now what we got to do is we have to draw our background texture. Well, where do we get our background texture from? We certainly could dump it in the resources folder and pull it into our game resources class, but I think it's a little bit more straightforward in this particular instance to add a public texture background field to our start screen. Now what I can do is I can simply say GUI.drawTexture, passing in a rect of 0, 0, width, and height, passing in background. Now, before I move on to position my buttons, I want to see how this looks. So let's jump back into Unity. Let's jump into our start scene, say that 10 times, and jump into our main camera where our start screen script is attached to, and let's go ahead and add our main menu texture to it. So I'm going to go open up textures, and I'm going to click and drag my main menu onto textures. So now I have my main menu screen here. I'm going to make sure to set the texture type to GUI and hit apply. So with that, I'm going to go back to my main camera. I'm going to click and drag main menu onto background, and then I'm going to hit play. And we have an issue. So jumping back into our code, we'll see the problem, hopefully immediately, or to some, now this is something that's going to trip people up. The scale, you have to provide a 1 to it. You can't just do X and Y. You also have to provide a Z. Otherwise, the math gets all confuzzled because you can't have something with the scale of 0 in any of the axis because then it won't render Jumping back into Unity, we'll hit play, and now we'll see our background texture is applied. But you'll also notice that our GUI is now all the way up here on the top left, and it's very tiny. Now, that's because of the scaling. So what we want to do instead is I want to actually place buttons without any text on them over these three areas so that I can click on them and also see a nice beveled effect. So again, this is something I already have chosen out. I've already looked at the texture and I've already identified how I want to position my buttons. So let's go ahead and write our three buttons. The first button I'm going to do is our start button, which is going to be done with GUI.button with a new rect of 850, 315, 279, 100, with the content of empty string. Now, if we press this button, we're going to do what we did down here. So I'm going to say game manager instance.instance.start game, and then I'm going to say application.load level first level. Next up, I'm going to do another button. If GUI.button, passing in a rect of something like 850 for the left, 500 on top, 279 on width, and 108 on height, and of course passing in blank as the content. What this is going to do is we're simply going to say application.load level, and we're going to do what we did down here, which is the high score screen. The final button we want is the quit button. So I'm going to say if GUI.button, passing in a new rect of 850, 700, 279, 100, then application.quit. Now that I've placed all my buttons, I can remove the old code that I was referencing. So I'm just going to nuke all of that. And jumping back into Unity and hitting play, we should now see these have buttons on them.
Very nice.
Yep, and they have that nice little effect on them that comes with the default buttons theme. So now if I hit high scores, I go to the high score screen. If I hit new game, I'll go into the actual game. And then if I complete the game, we'll go to our end screen game, or end game screen. Okay, so that was fun. Let's go on to our high score screen. So opening up our scenes, let's jump into high score screen, make sure we save our start screen.unity, and let's hit play. And this is what we get. Well, we want this to look like
Our pretty one that we just did.
Yep, this one. So to do that is there's gonna actually be a couple things that we have to do. First thing, obviously, is we're going to have to bring in our, let's just do this right now. I'm going to bring in the high score screen into textures. I'm going to just drag and drop. Make sure I import it as GUI and hit apply. So that's all well and good. Now we're going to jump into our high score screen script. So jumping into high score screen, we're now going to, well, do a lot of stuff. In fact, we're going to do so much stuff that I'm just going to nuke almost all the existing code out of it, because we're just going to effectively do what we did before, but with a couple twists. So let's go ahead and do our scaling first. Private const float width equals 1920. Private const float height equals 1080. Let's add in a public texture. What I call the last one, background. So let's just do background. Okay, let's calculate our scaling. Let's do that before we get our scores out. So I'm going to say var width scale equals screen.width divided by our target width. Var height scale is screen.height divided by our target height. Then we'll say GUI matrix equals matrix 4x4 dot trs vector 3 0 0 0 quaternion dot identity and a scale of width scale, height scale, and of course 1. Then let's draw our texture. So I'll say GUI.drawTexture new rect 0 0 width height background. Oh, come on. There you go. Okay,
Awesome.
now that I've done that, I'm going to begin an area. Using GUI layout, we're going to be using GUI layout for our scores. So I want to begin an area with the GUI layout, so we'll constrain our GUI layout to a particular portion of the screen in GUI coordinates. So I'm simply going to do GUI layout dot begin area, passing in a new rect of rector 173 186 1035 724. Now, just like the other begin methods and end methods, we must match it with an end area invocation after we're done with the area. So next up, I'm going to say for each var score in scores, GUI layout dot begin horizontal, GUI layout dot end horizontal. Inside of that, I'm going to say GUI layout dot label score dot name. I'm going to say GUI layout dot label blank points, bring in string format, and then we'll do score dot points. And that concludes our scores. This will cause an issue for anybody who's paying really, really close attention, but we will address that very shortly. Let's finish up this method with implementing our back button. So I'm going to say if GUI.button new rect 845 960 205 71 with empty content, then application load level start screen. Sound good?
Sounds awesome.
Great. So jumping back into Unity, I'm going to select main camera. I'm going to see my high scores screen script right there, and then I'm going to click and drag the high scores texture onto the background. Now, I'm going to hit play, but we're going to see an issue. That does not look ideal.
No, that's not pretty.
No. I mean, at least our back button is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But the actual high scores themselves don't look so great. What we're going to do is we are going to show how to put together a custom GUI style for our horizontals and for our points and for our text. What do I mean by that? Well, we need to control their presentation. So let's go ahead and figure out how to do that. You'll notice that each one of these methods accepts, or typically accepts, a overload that brings in a GUI style. A GUI style is basically a data structure that describes to Unity how to present some sort of GUI element. What's really cool about them is that, well, or what's really bad about them? Yeah. Let's just go ahead and show how to do this. I'm not going to get into anything about this. We're going to do a public GUI style. And we're going to do 3 fields. We're going to do a row style, a text style, and a points style. So we can independently style the rows, the text, and the points. Now, the row style, remember, this is public, so we can edit it in the inspector. Now, the row style is going to be passed into the begin horizontal on the GUI layout. The text style is going to be applied to the label that we pass our name into. Once it gets around to typing it for me, thank you. And then our point style will be applied to our points label. So if we jump back into Unity and hit play, we'll see something a little disappointing. It looks like it all disappeared. Actually, it hasn't. When you have a GUI style, you are overwriting the default styles for Unity, and the default GUI style has a text color of black. So let me show you guys how we can fix that. Clicking back on the main camera, our high score screen now has these 3 little things, the row style, a text style, and a point style, and they expand into a custom editor. I'm going to go ahead and move my project into a tabbed view with my inspector so that we can see more of this editor. So for example, if I went into text style and I opened up the normal property and I changed the text color to white, we'll see that the text doesn't appear. It does appear. So that's great, but it's still really small. That's also very easy to fix because I'm simply going to go to font size and type in 32. Now, we'll notice that there isn't any padding between these different rows. I don't really like that. That's why we created the row style. So let's jump into the row style, and I'm actually going to add in a bottom margin. So I'm going to go to row style, margin, and I'm going to add a bottom margin of 20, 15. There. So now there's some margin in between them. Remember, the row style is applied to our horizontal. Now let's do our point style. Our point style will have a background of some sort of tealish, bright tealish color with a font size of 32. But you'll also notice right here they're not aligned. That's because they don't have a fixed width. We can easily fix this by changing the fixed width to whatever we want. So as you see, as I'm dragging out our fixed width, we're getting some level of control over the width of our points. So I think 400 looks pretty good. All right, so what do you think about the high score screen so far, Steve?
I think it's looking pretty good.
Awesome. But there's a problem. When is there never a problem?
Always there's a problem.
I'm going to stop playing, and then I'm going to hit the play button again, and we lost all of our GUI stuff.
Oh, dastardly Unity.
Yep. So I showed you guys the parameters that I wanted, so I'm just going to really quickly reapply them. This is something that will bite you, so be always aware of it when you're working with Unity, especially when you're working with things that you kind of want to see as you're editing, but can't because, well, they just won't persist. So I'm going to change the text style to white, change the font size to 32, and I think that's fine for my text style. I'm going to go to point style. I'm going to change the color to another like bluish teal color. That looks cool. And then I'm going to change the font size to 32, and I'm going to change the fixed width to 400. Hitting play, we will now see that result. All right, looking good?
Indeed.
So now we have a high score screen and we have a main menu. And it is as resolution independent as possible. It does have some scaling artifacts once you go past the recommended aspect ratio, but that's mostly fine. So now that we've done that, there's one more screen we have to implement, but that screen is going to be even more complicated than these last two. And that's going to be our end screen. So going back into my project, I'm going to open up my end screen, and I'm going to hit play, and what's going to happen is, well, actually, I think, yeah, let's remove that and pretend it wasn't there. What'll happen if you play now is you'll get an object reference not set to an instance of an object because we haven't placed our game manager instance game object into the scene. So to do that, for testing purposes, I can go ahead up to game object, create empty, and then I can add game manager instance to it, hit enter, make sure to check his debug, hit play, and now we can test our end screen in isolation from the rest of our application, so we don't have to continuously run through the game every time we want to see a new change. Now that we've done that, let's go back to our project and import our win screen and our lose screen. So I'm going to control click on lose screen and win screen, and I'm simply going to drag and drop them into textures. So we now have lose screen and we now have win screen. But now we have to go back into Visual Studio and write our code for it. So jumping back into Visual Studio, I'm going to run over to the end screen, and let's go ahead, and I'm going to modify this code as we go along because I don't want to redo all of the high score stuff, but stuff will be removed as we move along. The things that I'm going to start off with are the private const float width 1920, private const float height of 1080. Then I'm going to put together our public fields, which are going to be public texture win background and lose background. And then I'm going to create our public GUI style, Now you'll notice I'm only going to do public GUI style text style. I'm actually going to style the text box and the buttons slightly differently. And this is going to be another technique that we can use to take. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and start writing out our code. Now the first thing we need to do is identify our ratios. So I'm going to say var width equals screen width. Oops, screen width divided by width. Var height equals screen height divided by height. I'm going to say GUI.matrix equals matrix 4x4 dot trs new vector 3 or why am I doing that? I can just do vector 3.0, can't I? Vector 3.0 quaternion dot identity new vector 3 width height 1. And then just to be consistent with our other screens, I'm going to call this width scale and I'm going to call this height scale. The name of the variables are relevant, obviously. Now that I've done that, we have to determine if we should display the win screen or the lose screen. So I'm going to say if game manager instance dot did win, then GUI dot draw texture new rect 0 0 width height win background. And I'm simply going to do else GUI dot draw texture new rect 0 0 width height lose background. So now I have that all set up. Let's go ahead and begin our area. Now I am going to be presenting the form on both the win screen and the lose screen as I did before. Again, just for testing purposes, you might not want to display the form if you lost. But that's up to you. So next up, I'm going to say GUI layout dot begin area new rect, and the rect I'm passing in is 496. That's 396. 496, comma 272, 928, 538. That's my area. And then I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to make sure that I add the GUI layout end area. Okay, so now that I have my begin area and my end area all lined up, let's go ahead and remove this, because we already know if we wanted lost based off the texture that was drawn. So we remove that. We'll keep our with blank points, but we'll pass in text style so that we can style it from within the inspector. So now we have our text style. So next up, we'll leave most of this the way that we did before, except of course we will be providing text style into the you got a high score.
Eventually.
Yeah. I'm just going to copy and paste this, because we're also going to be applying it to the score added, and we're going to be applying it to the you didn't get a high score. So that's where our text styles are being applied at. Now again, we will be doing something special with the text field and the button, but we'll do that here in a moment. Next up, I'm going to remove this GUI layout.button because we're now going to be using the normal GUI methods for our button. So I'll delete that. After the end area, I'm going to say if game manager instance dot did win and GUI dot button new rectangle at 843 840 240 86 with an empty string as content, then go ahead and say application dot load level start screen. Otherwise, if not, game manager instance dot did win and GUI dot button, we're going to pass in a different rect. We're going to pass in a rect of 822 895 240 86. Then we're going to do the same thing. Application load level start screen. Oops. Okay, so in theory, this should mostly work. If we come back to our end screen and hit play, we see that, well, I never passed in the textures into the thing. That's easy to fix. I'm going to go back to my main camera, and I'm going to say win background. I'm going to choose our win screen, and our lose background, I'm going to say lose screen. And then, just because you guys have already seen this, I'm going to style my text style the same way that I styled the other one, with a margin though. I'll get a margin bottom of 20, I'll give it a color of white, and I'll give it a font size of 32. Sound good?
Sounds awesome.
All right. So now if we go ahead and hit play, we get this. Well, it seems our button wasn't quite positioned exactly where it needs to be. I think perhaps I got, yeah, I got these two mixed up. The first one is for when we're on the win screen, the other one's for, or when we're on the lose screen, the other one's for when we're on the win screen. And that's because the different screens have a different place for the button. Jumping back into Unity, that error should be corrected, and it is. However, we have one more problem. Our high scores are clearly not working so well because, well, the button and the text field are very tiny.
Indeed.
So to correct that, what we're going to do is something interesting. We're going to create a GUI style inside of code that is based off of an existing GUI style. Now, why would we do that? Well, if we tried to do the same thing we did with text style, we would be forced to recreate the GUI style that Unity has for buttons and text boxes. It's actually much easier if all you're trying to do is change the font size and maybe the margin of something to construct inside code your own GUI style that's based off of an existing one. That's very easy to do, actually. Jumping back into code, I'm going to create two private GUI styles. So I'm going to say private GUI style, button style, and text field style. So our button style and text field style will be based off of existing styles. Now, you might be thinking, so where are we going to instantiate them? The answer is going to be on GUI. That's because you cannot access GUI methods outside of on GUI, unfortunately, and we are going to be relying on a particular GUI method to retrieve the existing style for our default buttons and default text fields. So we have to kind of do a sort of hack. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, if button style is null, then create them. Again, I can't put this code on awake or on start because I'm accessing a GUI function to do this. So I'm going to say button style equals new GUI style, GUI.skin.button, and then I'm going to use object initialization syntax to set the font size to 32. Then I'm going to do something similar with the text field style. Say text field style equals new GUI style, GUI skin text field, passing in font size of 32, but I'm also going to set the margin to something. So I'm saying margin equals bottom equals 20. Again, using object initialization syntax in C# makes this look very straightforward. So now that I've properly constructed both of my additional custom styles, let's go ahead and apply them. Scrolling down, let's locate our button and our text field and pass in the corresponding custom style. So I'm going to pass in text field style here. Come on. And then button style here. Now that I've done that, jumping back into Unity and hitting play, we will see that our text field is indeed appropriately sized, as is our save score button. So now if we were to run through the game in its entirety, that won't work because when we started in end screen, our game manager was set to debug mode, which means that doesn't switch through players. So to run through the game in its entirety, we have to start on the start screen. So I'm going to hit play, new game. I'm I'm going to run through the game. We get to our second level, and then we get a win screen with you get win 270 points, and you got a high score. Type in our name, save score, back, high scores, and then we see our new score.
Well done, sir.
Alrighty. I think that pretty much wraps up the bits of polish that we wanted to add to this game. Let's make sure the lose screen works real fast, just so I have an excuse to blow up some more asteroids.
I knew it would come.
There we go. You have lost. It still shows the high score again. You can choose whether or not you want to do that. I mean, it makes sense not to if you lose to force people to go through the waypoints, but for testing purposes, that's perfectly acceptable. Put in our score, hit save score, go back, go to high scores, and we have this.
Very nice. And pretty even.
Yep. So I think that pretty much wraps everything up.
Outstanding. We have a game.
Indeed.